and a certain Gareth Edwards. Wales were to dominate the 70s through those fine three-quarters and also with some skillful forwards, men of great power and immense ability, such as Mervyn Davies, Delmy Thomas, John Taylor, Derek Quinnell, and the legendary Pontypool front row of Charlie Faulkner, Bobby Windsor and Graham Price. But those brilliant Welshmen did more than just make Wales a powerful rugby team. They underpinned successive British Lions touring sides to New Zealand in 71 and South Africa in 74. So much so that those two tours became the most successful in Lions history. Of course, other countries contributed too, none more so than Ireland with the likes of Willie John McBride and Mike Gibson, and England with David Duckham and Fran Cotton. Then there was my beloved Scotland with star players like the Flying Scot Andy Irvine and Big Gordon Brown, the renowned late Brun Freitrun, who together with his fellow Lions forwards rumbled across the big parched fields of South Africa in 74 like horses on the hoof. All played their part in making so many of the Five Nations Championship matches of the 1970s truly special. Then there were times when the mighty touring teams from the Southern Hemisphere rugby countries of South Africa, Australia and New Zealand came to Britain. As part of my homework for the match days, I would always attend the visitors' training sessions on Friday mornings, spending long hours watching intently, studying individual players' features and trying to memorise each in conjunction with the face and name so that I would be able to identify them instantly in my commentary. Homework was a crucial element. After so many years of what I regarded as a close affinity with Wales, I felt it was perhaps appropriate that I was to end my days as a television commentator at the Principality's famous ground. I loved the atmosphere of Cardiff on match days. Welsh rugby headquarters has always been sited right in the heart of the city. Grounds such as Twickenham and the Stade de France in Paris are a train ride out of their home cities, while even Murrayfield and Lansdowne Road are a walk away from the centres of Edinburgh and Dublin respectively. But in Cardiff, great busloads and trainloads of supporters are decanted straight into the city centre, which creates a fabulous mood. The Welsh national team might no longer be as preeminent as they were in that golden era, but loyalty to the game and the Principality remains strong. How else would you explain the fanatical support Wales continue to receive when they play? Why else, when the Millennium Stadium was being built, did crowds of 60,000 or more regularly make the long journey all the way up the M4 to London to see them play at their temporary home at Wembley? Spectators often had to return home disappointed, but the day their team beat England there in 1999 must have made it all worthwhile. Truth to tell, 2002 had not been a vintage season for the International Championship. There were worrying signs that a championship within a championship was emerging, with England and France putting themselves in a class of their own. Of course, those two great rugby union nations have always had much larger pools of talent in which to draw for their sides. We used to joke up in Scotland that England could choose 3 teams to win the championship if anyone ever told them how to go about the selection process. For years, they didn't seem able to get their show on the road in terms of planning, proper preparation and consistent selection. But by the time professionalism came along in 1995, England had at last started to translate their latent power into success on the field. France had always had power and potential. In the late 1960s and 70s, when Wales had been the only show in town, it was the French who went with them, participating in some classic encounters in Cardiff and Paris. No one else could match the pair of them in that era of high quality and class on anything other than a very occasional basis. But this season had been different. Leaving aside the performances of England and France, you had to admit there had been some woeful displays by the other 4 countries in the now expanded tournament of 6 nations. Wales, for example, had gone to Dublin's Lansdowne Road in February for their first game and been completely humiliated 54-10, 6 tries to 1. Yet a fortnight later, when Wales confronted the mighty French on their home territory in Cardiff, they very nearly achieved the upset of the season. The match ended with Wales 37-33 behind, pounding the French line and having 2 lunges for the line stopped by inches. That was what I'd always loved about this great championship, the element of the unexpected. That one side, in the depths of despair after a heavy defeat, could somehow rally and just 14 days later almost pull off a feat no one had envisaged. Wales didn't quite manage it that day, but they had gone on to beat Italy 44-20 before suffering another big defeat, a 50-10 reverse at the hands of the English at Twickenham. Scotland, meanwhile, had lurched equally alarmingly through the season. After a 29-3 loss to England at Murrayfield, they won 29-12 in Italy, but there then followed defeats by Ireland, 43-22 in Dublin, and France, 22-10 at Murrayfield. For the final weekend of the championship, England were in Rome to play Italy on the Sunday and were inevitably heavy favourites. But having lost to France in Paris in a titanic clash, they had given France the chance to win the title and the Grand Slam if they could beat Ireland in Paris on the Sunday. So, should I choose Paris or Cardiff as the venue for my final television commentary from a Six Nations Championship game? It was always going to be Cardiff for me. I knew it would be a special feeling sitting up there in that magnificent new stadium they had created in time for the 1999 World Cup, which Wales had hosted. I liked the Millennium Stadium. It seemed to me that the designers had got it exactly right in terms of the pitch of the huge stands that began to dominate the Cardiff skyline when building began in the mid-1990s. At some of the modern international rugby grounds, the stands rise backwards well away from the field, and the spectators are an awful long way away from the action. If you happen to be sitting at the very top of one of the towering stands at Twickenham or the Stade de France in Paris, you have as good a view, so people tell me, of nearby Richmond or the Eiffel Tower as you do of the match taking place far below you. The old Twickenham Stadium was a great example of one where the crowd was right on top of the field, and it brought the crowd much closer to the players. It was this intimacy that made those old grounds so unique. Having grown up in the days when the adults pushed us wee youngsters down the steps to the front by the fence at Murrayfield so that we would have a better view, I loved them for it. In Cardiff, they seemed to have managed to create a smart new stadium without losing the intimacy of the place. I took my designated seat in our lofty eyrie on that early spring day and surveyed the scene. There was the familiar sea of red, the thousands of Welsh supporters. The grass was a vivid green, fresh and inviting, as it seems to look everywhere these days for a big international match. I chuckled quietly to myself at the memory of all the Arms Park mud heaps on which I had seen international games played down the years. I remember Gareth Edwards once breaking downfield, kicking ahead, and winning the race to the touchdown, and sliding on over the dead ball line into the liquid red shale behind the pitch. When he got up and ran back to the halfway line with his colleagues, he looked like some creation from the sculptor's table brought to life. Having settled into my commentary position, I opened up my faithful old briefcase. Here I carried the working accoutrements of a television commentator, the tools of my trade: spare pencils, rubbers, sheets of paper, a stopwatch, an ordinary clock, the match programme, and most important, my prompt sheet. On it I would cram so much information that I reckon I could have talked live on air until midnight if I'd needed to. By the time a match kicked off on a Saturday afternoon, I probably knew more about any individual player than the wee lad's own mother. Where and when he'd been born, how many brothers and sisters he had, where he'd grown up and learned his rugby, which local school he had attended, and which junior club he had started out with. Then there were the little items of interest which I spent long hours searching out. I always felt that the viewers might like to have some extra information about a player they were watching, that it might enhance the pleasure they took in seeing him perform if they knew a little about him. So I used to go to a lot of trouble to unearth some of these facts. Then there were the phrases which I suppose had become my stock in trade. It might surprise you to learn that, for the most part, I never prepared those. They'll be celebrating in the clubhouse at Mansfield Park tonight, just tripped off my tongue one day. Who knows where it came from? You see, in general, I believed it was always a good thing to allow a little of what you might call emotion into my broadcasts. If possible, I wanted people to get some sense of the wonderful atmosphere at the ground from their armchair at home. I liked to try to make my commentaries flow. Yes, I needed my prompt sheet. I wouldn't go anywhere without it. But in practice, I reckon I used only 5% of what was on it. Most of the information was there, just in case I needed it. I preferred to talk about what was happening in front of me, and more importantly, in front of the viewers. I was sad and a little apprehensive about the decision I'd made to retire. But I was 77 and had...
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.